Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of State of Email Live Beyond DMARC. This is our 57th episode now, and we can't wait to get started. We're going to give just a minute or so because it takes everyone a while to establish their Zoom connections, and we've had a load of signups for today. So while we do that, I'm just going to cover off a couple of quick housekeeping items. So firstly, we nearly always get asked, is the webinar being recorded? And the good news is, yes, it is. And we'll follow up with all of you after the webinar, normally 24, 48 hours, and you'll get a copy of the slides. You'll get a link to a recording from the webinar as part of those follow-up activities. We will be taking your questions, and I'm guessing going to get quite a few of them today. So please specifically use the Q&A button in your Zoom controls to submit your questions, not the chat. And we've got some time ring fenced towards the end of the session to run through a few of those and hopefully answer all of your questions. And just to keep things fair, we've also got a few questions lined up for you, the audience. So do keep an eye open for our interactive polls, which will be running throughout the conversation. We would love to hear your responses. So what's on today's agenda? Well, we're going to start with our highly popular email metrics analysis to see how global email KPIs are trending at the moment, especially now that Gmail and Yahoo are enforcing their new bulk sender requirements. Then we're going to be hearing from our very special guest from Valimail as we talk about DMARC, why P equals none should just be the very starting point for your authentication journey. And we'll finish up, as I say, answering some of the many questions we're predicting today. And while we're at it, do promote all the best bits from today's webinar using hashtag state of email. My name's Guy Hansen. I am VP of Customer Engagement here at Validity. I am speaking to you from our London office today, and believe it or not, the sun's shining. Joining me today, Seth Blank, who is CTO at Valimail, and my Validity colleague, Megan Farquharson, who is email strategist at Validity. Seth will do a full introduction in just a few slides' time before we jump into our conversation. But it's Megan that we're starting with. We're going to be having a look at global email volumes and a broad range of important metrics like complaints, SRD rates, unknown users, rejected rates, and probably most importantly, how inbox placement is trending globally, as I say, especially following the beginning of enforcement of the new Gmail and Yahoo bulk sender requirements. So Megan, what's been going on over the last 4 weeks?
Yeah, happy to jump right into this. So as we can see with global email volume, in May, it remained pretty steady. If you look closely, you can see there's a few days here and there that are slightly higher than what we saw in April. I personally was expecting to see a couple more spikes, around the US holidays like Mother's Day and Memorial Day, but it just looks pretty steady. And if we compare to what we saw at the same time last year, it's about the same. So it'll be interesting to see if we have the same trend with the volume remaining steady with just those few dips at the end of summer right up until we hit peak season. So we'll have to see if it stays the same this year. For spam complaints, normally I would say we don't see a spike like this without a corresponding spike in volume as well. And there are many, many, many variables that could be affecting this metric. One thing that I've noticed is that some senders seem to think that just because they added the list unsubscribe header, it means they can remove the unsubscribe link in the footer. But subscribers are they're too used to looking at the footer to unsubscribe. We've trained them well. So they might be inclined to report an email as spam if they don't see that link anymore. And we can also look at how mailbox providers like Gmail, of course, are making it easier for users to unsubscribe with the list unsubscribe header. but they also prompt subscribers to choose whether or not to mark that message as spam with a follow-up prompt. So that could also be, leading towards this spike. So hopefully as senders continue to adapt to the new policies put in place by providers this year, we'll start to see this metric trend back down. So this is a nice downward trend. I do like to see this. So Microsoft SRD junk votes are populated by Microsoft asking a select group of subscribers if an email they received is junk or not. And Microsoft has mentioned that they're making some changes, and we have seen some spam placement increase with them over the past couple of months. And of course, if an email hits their spam folder, then it's not valid for an SRD vote, which could be contributing to this decline. And it's also very possible that the new rules in place by Gmail and Yahoo are having a ripple effect. So it might be making it easier to unsubscribe might be helping limit those junk votes. This is an interesting one to me. So unknown users jumped up quite a bit after a very quiet April. And there are many reasons why this could have happened. It could be providers potentially making a new push to remove inactive users. It could be senders reaching too far back into their list ahead of Memorial Day sends. I've also seen a few cases where educational emails, such as college addresses that end in .edu, are suddenly being unknown at the end of May, could be due to graduation and cutting off of mailbox access. So there are many reasons for why this metric could be spiking. So instead of trying to identify one specific reason, let's take a second to focus more on being proactive about it. So before your big summer campaigns, make sure you validate and clean your list, check your bounce codes for any trends, rethink your engagement strategy and segments, and just let's keep things clean this summer. So for sender rejected, it's good to see this metric trending down. And I think it'll be interesting to see in next month's state of email if this changes, starting in June as the list unsubscribe requirement goes into enforcement. Maybe some change as things start switching from temp or soft fails into permanent rejections. So we'll have to see what happens here. And for inbox placement, so before we really go into this, just a quick reminder that that dip you see in March was due to a seed list update, so we can just overlook that part of the charts. But in May, we are seeing inboxing at a pretty steady rate. Spam placement seems to be taking the place of missing rates as spam goes up and missing goes down. And that corresponds to what we were seeing with the rise in complaints and unknown user metrics and the decrease in rejected rates. And also, when I was reviewing this data with Guy before the webinar, we did notice when we were comparing quarters 1 and quarter 2 that Gmail's spam rates increased from 4.3 to 6.3%, which I think ties back with the spike we saw previously in complaint rates. And with Yahoo, the interesting metric we notice is that their missing rates increased from 10.5 to 11.8%. So again, that could be contributing to the unknown user increase. So as both mailbox providers make changes and enforce them, we'll likely continue to see more fluctuations in placement.
Thank you so much. Some super interesting observations there. And, I think we are probably, as email marketers, wondering what kind of impact we're going to be seeing from Gmail and Yahoo enforcement. And I think you've probably given us some early indicators there, especially as you say, when you read that hand in hand with the increased complaint rates and the increase in unknown user rates. Some fascinating data there. And I'm sure today's guest was probably sitting watching those with a load of interest as well. So speaking of whom, it's a real pleasure to introduce Seth Blank from Valleymail. A brief introduction. For those of you that don't know him, Seth is a serial entrepreneur and startup executive with multiple acquisitions under his belt. 20 years of experience in building successful teams and scalable, profitable technologies. He's the current co-chair of the IETF DMARC Working Group, the co-chair of the MORG Technical Committee, and chair of the Auth Indicators Working Group developing BIMI. So for the purposes of today's conversation, you are in very good hands. He spends his free time trying to find new things to throw on the grill when the Brooklyn weather permits. He's a voracious reader of science fiction and a devoted parent to a kindergarten with way too much energy. I was there 20 years ago. I feel your pain. Seth, great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Guy. I'm really happy to be here, and it's a pleasure to talk with you today.
Brilliant. I was thinking before we jump into today's conversation, I'm sure a lot of our audience has at least heard of Valimail, but would you maybe like to take a minute or so just to provide us with a quick overview of your business?
Absolutely. So Valimail provides automated email authentication, and we take all the pain in things like SPF, DMARC, DKIM, BIMI, and make it push button and easy. And so we have the highest success rates in the industry because we make it a simple solution for you versus professional services and tons of changes and lots of uncertainty. Easy, simple, automated.
Awesome. And as we go through the conversation, we'll be showing a few links to some of your recent resources as well, so our audience can get to know you guys better. So let's kick off then. And I think we're going to be spending a lot of time today talking about how to protect your brands from industry threats. So it feels like a good place to start is by talking about what those threats are. You know, it sometimes feels like the popularity of the email channel is a bit of a double-edged sword. You know, brands and consumers both love it. It's highly revenue effective and prized for that. But it's almost like those very attributes are what also makes it popular with the bad actors. And, you know, the recent AI explosion is just amplifying this. You know, while AI is helping to drive more effective marketing, it's also helping to drive more effective scamming. And because of this, the email threat landscape is highly dynamic. It's constantly evolving. To be honest, it's a bit hard to keep up with. So, Seth, your opening question, what do you think the email threat landscape looks like right now? And, you know, what are the key threats that marketers and consumers need to be keeping their eyes open for?
So it's really significant right now. Spam and phishing are at all-time highs, and we're seeing nation states abuse them. So it's not just your garden variety criminals. There are tons of spam and phishers. Like phishing's big industry. And the rise of generative AI has made it even easier to try things that fit like a glove. And the core of the threat is that it is easy and perfectly legal to send fake email as anyone else. So I could send without the protections that Validity has in place, but prior to these protections, you could send an email as guy@validity.com all day long. You could send an email as billg@microsoft.com all day long. This is easy because when email was built, it was a trusted network of academics on trusted systems. And we've had this system for 40 years, and it had no idea when it was conceptualized about how businesses would transact online and drive commerce online. And so now everything in email is patches on top of patches, and you as the brand owner have to put the work in to protect yourself. And when you don't, you are open to all these different forms of attack. And to focus in on business email compromise, which I think is really relevant when we talk about brand protection, the FBI has shared data recently. 2 years ago, they said the cumulative 5-year total of business email compromise, so damages to businesses, dollars that left businesses, was $23 billion. Last year, it was up to $45 billion, right? It nearly doubled in 1 year. It's insane. And there's a reason Google and Yahoo have put these requirements into place. It's not because they want to make life difficult for marketers. It's brands are being abused and consumers are being defrauded. And when you actually take control of this and take control of your brand, you protect your employees, your consumers, your executives, and it impacts your deliverability in a positive way. And we're going to talk about all of that today.
Absolutely. And listen, I mean, those dollar numbers you were just quoting are pretty eye-watering. I think if there's anybody out there still thinking, do we need to care? Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're going to ask our audience a question in a second, but just before we do, I mean, you were talking about the fact that some of these bad actors, they aren't just sort of shadowy guys, hitting their keyboards in a bedroom. These are nation states at play. And Seth, I'm sure you saw this article from the National Security Agency a couple of weeks ago saying, here's North Korea already trying to target, poorly implemented DMARC as a new scamming opportunity. It's relentless, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and it's so easy. And we've seen from our own data that companies that have DMARC in place are attacked at only 20% of the rate of companies without DMARC. Right? When it's easy, bad actors go after the soft targets. If someone's protected, why do the harder, more difficult thing? Why not just go look for brands that don't have proper protections and impersonate them and try and defraud their users? And so we have to get
carry
strong
on.
protections. Sorry, guy. Right. The point is there's always more work to do. Security is never 100%. And I'm sure your goal as a marketer is to deliver the most impactful communications you can to your audience to drive growth, right? Not having the appropriate protections in place actually harms your brand because all the bad stuff done in your name counts against you. And when you actually control your brand, you get the deliverability you deserve. And that's the most important thing here.
Absolutely right. So you mentioned the key word there, protection. Audience, here comes your first question of the day. And we're just keen to understand, do you understand how DMARC actually does protect your brand from bad actors? And we're giving you a couple of options, and it's absolutely fine if you're not a DMARC expert yet. Hopefully we'll change that by the end of today. But keen to see your responses here. And looking good. I think that's just about all the votes. If we can publish the poll and have a quick look at that. There we go. So there's probably no surprises there. I think a majority response saying, yeah, we kind of get it, but, we could probably know a bit more than we do at the moment. I think that top response, yeah, we've got a strong understanding from about 30% of our respondents. That's pretty encouraging.
That's great.
So we'll build on that as we carry on with our conversation. And thank you, audience. There's more of those to come, so keep your eyes open. Some really interesting feedback there, Seth, and probably reinforcing a suspicion that quite a few senders implemented DMARC, perhaps because Gmail and Yahoo told them they had to, but without necessarily understanding quite what it was all about. So let's talk to this. Let's have a quick overview of how spoofing happens, and then how DMARC can help with protecting your brand against that.
Absolutely. So the way spoofing works is you can send an email with any email address you want, and it delivers. And the open technologies, right, SPF, DKIM, DMARC, what they do is they validate when a message is received that it came from who it says it came from. And the way that works is the same as multi-factor authentication. You as a domain owner, let's say I own validity.com, I publish in DNS an SPF record, which is effectively a whitelist of servers my mail can come from, or a DKIM public key, which can be used to validate the mail came from me. So SPF and DKIM have been around for nearly 20 years now, and they help the machine validate where the message came from. The problem is this is still abusable, and this abuse is what leads to tremendous fraud. I can authenticate a message from Fisher.com. And then in the from that I show to users, say, hey, it's Guy. And that is deeply, deeply damaging. And that's the most effective way to get a business to part with money is to send an email from someone they're expecting for a transaction they expect to do. And it's actually not from that person. And it's really easy. And that's where DMARC comes in. And what DMARC has, and we'll talk a little bit more in a second, is the concept called alignment. And that just says what I authenticate must match what I show in the from to the user. And when you have those two things, it turns out you have a deeply powerful anti-fraud mechanism that also gives you control of the reputation for your brand when you send emails, which is core to the future of email, which I know is a critical topic we want to talk about. So to put it simply, spoofing is very simple. It's easy, it is legal, and we have bad actors doing it at scale globally. You can put protections in place which are open standards, which connect your reputation for you, and means other things done in your name don't count. And the first thing we see when people get DMARC reports are the sheer amount of crap, excuse my language, that they didn't know was being sent in their name.
Yeah.
And you can turn that all off with DMARC when you apply a policy. When you say mail sent in my name that's not authenticated as me should get spammed or just outright rejected. And that's critical because until you have a policy in place, you don't own your reputation. Everything else can count against you, right? DMARC, there's a lot of work to do and it can be hard, but the protection is binary and you have to actually turn policy on. And that's what this North Korean hack is. There are many entities that have started the DMARC journey, that have put reporting in place, that are authenticating mail, but haven't flipped the binary switch. And North Korea is going after them hard.
So I think a really great overview there. And I think, you've already touched on, some of the primary DMARC benefits, the obvious one that it helps you identify and eliminate fraud which might be perpetrated against your own email program. I think in the conversation, we're going to talk about spin-off benefits in terms of better deliverability, the establishment of greater trust between you and your customers. Are there any other DMARC benefits that are worth talking about?
So yes, the first one is actually at the core of DMARC is reporting. You can actually see all the email being sent in your name and its status. And this provides illumination for an organization. You can see shadow IT. You can see marketing services you didn't even know you were using, right? You get the whole visibility into your email ecosystem that until DMARC came around was never accessible. And people find that valuable and also, frankly, a little scary when they see what's being sent in the name. And then it gives you the ability to control that. I think that's the most critical thing because you need that to actually do the work of DMARC. And then you get all the benefit after that. And as you said, a lot built on top of it. Some of the core bits of DMARC unlock AMP, unlock schema, unlock BIMI, and a host of other things we can talk about as well.
100%, and some of which we will as we continue with our conversation. So deliverability in 2024 has been dominated by the new bulk sender requirements that Gmail and Yahoo have introduced. I think we've already alluded to them. And most importantly, that they are now actively enforcing. So while these new requirements have definitely raised the bar for email marketers, is there a case to be made that Yahoo has actually boosted awareness of DMARC? So it's been a good thing in terms of raising the profile of this form of authentication. And how do you feel the market's reacted to it?
Oh, it's absolutely been wonderful. There's been a huge increase in the number of domains that have been adopting DMARC. One of the critical things here is in the first 6 weeks of this year, the number of domains that we monitor that have a DMARC record in for the first time grew by over 55%. Wow. And there are some huge issues here with how people are implementing DMARC. but they're actually making a difference. And the thing is, larger organizations have sort of gotten the word about DMARC, right? Major company CISOs have been running programs for years, but it was everyone else who needed it, who didn't know it. It wasn't approachable or accessible. There wasn't the right information. They're now adopting it. And so we see this giant jump, right? The 55% jump in the market. 99% of this are SMBs who are approaching DMARC for the first time because their sending platform has told them it's important because they've heard from Google and Yahoo. And there has been some short-sightedness here, but the short-sightedness is okay, right? We're taking steps as an ecosystem that are directionally making the ecosystem better and safer and more trusted for everyone. The critical issue here is 75% of these new domains that are doing DMARC for the first time have P equals none, which is monitoring mode, with no reporting. And the problem is the core of this requirement when it comes to authentication is you have to make sure the services that are sending on your behalf are aligned. And you can't know if you're aligned, if there are gaps that you must address without reporting. Reporting lets you do the work. Google and Yahoo don't need a reporting for them. You need the reporting for you. And that's a thing that's being missed, right? To put it differently, Google and Yahoo are basically saying, if you are a bulk sender, we are putting a DMARC policy on your mail, whether you've put the work in yourself or not, period. To do the work yourself, which you want to do so good mail isn't thrown away with bad mail, you need reports and you need to actually look at them and get an assessment. You may be okay, but you may not be. And there are tools out there and products that help, right? Google has Postmaster tools. Yahoo has their Sender Hub. Valomail has a free product called Monitor. Validity has Everest. There are things that you can use that will at least give you an understanding of what's going on. And that's essential so you don't have unintended effects of these new requirements.
That's a great chart and some great stats. I mean, everybody loves a good uplift chart. But I think, you're also saying to me that, we're by no means all there yet. I think it was you that was telling me there's some numbers from Yahoo that are saying DMARC implementation around about 80% at the moment. Was that correct?
Yeah, it's the other way around. It's about 20%. I think what we know roughly of the market, and these are ballpark figures, and there's lots of hearsay behind them. So do not take these as take these as directionally correct. There's about 400 million domains that send email, about 100 million domains that send legitimate email, about 25 million domains that send email on a daily basis. We've got 7 million here. So there's somewhere between 15 and 70 million domains that still have work to do, right? Assuming we're undercounting and we don't see everything, right? There's just so much of the market and so much of small businesses who send email that they want their consumers to receive that have work to do. And we want them to do that work well. So we're actually getting the protection that Google and Yahoo want, and these senders get the deliverability they deserve versus good mail being shut off along with that.
Definitely, because it's going to help them.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I think there's one other really important thing here too, Guy, which is it's also not just Google and Yahoo. These requirements are becoming an international movement. Eins and Eins in Germany has put in similar requirements. Other mailbox providers across the globe are implementing basically the same things. And Microsoft recently just said that they're going to have similar rules as well. It's a when, not an if. And so that makes this not Google Yahoo requirements. It's a new status quo for how you send email, period.
Absolutely right. And yeah, I mean, that's interesting news about Microsoft. By the time you add that to Yahoo, AOL, Gmail, the Maggies, that's well over 90% of a typical B2C email list. So you're going to need to fall into line. Audience,
Yeah.
here's your next question. And I'm guessing that a lot of you were part of that blue graph we were just looking at. We're keen to know how you went about implementing DMARC. Did you do it all by yourselves? Did you use some of those free external tools that Seth was talking about? Maybe used an external vendor like a Valimail? Or perhaps you're not quite there yet, although I'm sure you're planning for it. So keen to see how you approached your DMARC implementation. Great, I think we're just about there. Let's publish the results. So look at that, Seth. 60% of them went and did it the hard way, all by themselves. What do you think of that?
I think I'm curious if people implemented DMARC to the requirements or actually were doing this to get themselves to enforcement. The interesting stat here on this slide is only 3% of these domains got to enforcement.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious if we're talking about the bare minimum, this is the letter of the law, DMARC implementation, and how many people, because maybe, I bet this would be a very savvy audience. They may be way ahead of the curve here. The way these requirements are going is DMARC at enforcement is really the end state for everyone. And so I'm
absolutely
curious.
We'll come to that in a moment and sneak peek, but we're probably going to ask our audience something very similar to that too. So hopefully we'll get the answer. Excellent. Thank you, audience. And keep your eyes open. We've got 2 more coming your way. So here at Validity, email deliverability is a topic that's very close to our hearts. And as we've suggested, one benefit from implementing DMARC is the positive impact that it can have on deliverability. So especially thinking about the data that Megan showed to us a little bit earlier, and especially that big increase in complaint rates, makes any improvement or any possibility of better deliverability is a really important advantage. So let's talk about this. What are the factors that underpin DMARC helping to improve deliverability?
So it's actually a straight line to your reputation as a sender, right? In technical parlance, what matters the most is your aligned DKIM reputation, right? That's where you're sending attributes, good, bad, indifferent. And that's how a mailbox makes determination on if they want to deliver it or spam it or give it other treatment like banners. And what DMARC lets you do is when you have policy in place, turn off everything that's being done in your name that's not been authorized by you. And so the anecdote in the space, and this anecdote comes from the mailboxes themselves, not third parties, is that heavily phished brands, when they actually get DMARC in place, when they flip the bit, see about a 10% increase, improvement in their deliverability, which is substantial. And that's because when I send a fake email as Validity, that counts against Validity's reputation. But when Validity has DMARC at enforcement, which they do, that fake email doesn't count because it doesn't authenticate, so it doesn't attribute. And so that's significant. When we've seen the most significant case of this, which has been published and is insane, your mileage will not come close to this, right? Is HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which is the UK IRS for the US audience here. They had an 18% deliverability rate, right? Fewer than 1 in 5 emails they sent made it to the inbox, because they're the most heavily phished entity on earth. And then they got DMARC at enforcement in place. I think this was 2016, and their deliverability rate shot up to 98%, right? 18% to 98% by putting DMARC in place, because the crap didn't count against them anymore. Your mileage will vary, right? Heavily phished brands, 10%. It will probably be less for you, but it really depends on what's being sent in your name. And you don't know that till you get a DMARC report. And once you get the DMARC report, you can do something about it. And to go further too, DMARC has been pretty separate from deliverability. DMARC's mostly been in the security house. It's had some deliverability impact, but it's been about protecting your brand, protecting your consumers and employees, et cetera. With the new requirements, this new sending landscape we're in, DMARC's now the front door deliverability. You don't get deliverability. You don't get the deliverability you deserve until you have DMARC in place. And that's really, really meaningful. It's also a challenge for marketers because it's difficult. There's work to be done. There's process. You have to stay on top of it. You can't just set it and forget it. You have to have some level of maintenance of it to add new services, to remove other services, and to, from time to time, review the reports and make sure nothing unexpected is happening. And so there's more to be done now, but it makes the landscape better and ensures you're going to get the deliverability that's attributed to the mail you send, not mail someone else is sending as you.
Absolutely right. And I love that comment, those words you just used, that, DMARC is now the front door to a productive and good relationship with the big players like the Gmails, the Yahoos, Microsoft in future. That's absolutely right. I've actually just been having a quick look at the Q&A while you're answering that one. There's some great questions coming in. Audience, keep those coming in, and we're going to save them for the end, and then we'll answer as many of them as we can. So another aspect of DMARC where many email practitioners are maybe on slightly shaky ground is another of those phrases where we kind of think we know what it means, but maybe not to the level of detail that we really should. So let's cover this off. What does alignment actually mean?
Great. Thank you, guys. So this is where there's tons of nuance and where people can get very confused. And so DMARC is a three-legged stool. There's reporting, there's alignment, and then there's policy. And alignment is the thing that everything's aiming for. The point of reporting is so you can properly align your mail. And the point of policy is you say, hey, mail that's not aligned doesn't have to get delivered. And alignment is that anti-fraud mechanism I talked about. And it's very simply put, what you show a user in the from has to match what you authenticate. So if I'm sending an email from validity.com, I need to authenticate as validity.com, and I need the from address to also be from validity.com. And there's two forms of alignment. Strict alignment, which means we must have exact matching between the from domain and what's authenticated. And almost no one uses this. Strict alignment is basically used by a couple of banks and some entities that think strict means better and more secure. What we've learned over the last decade of DMARC is that strict's not really more secure. It's just way, way, way more work and more difficult and makes people less successful. Relaxed alignment is what lets a modern email program flourish. So most sending organizations use many, most brands use many senders, right? You may use, right, Marketo and MailChimp and Twilio SendGrid and Freshdesk and ZApproved. You have this corpus of things that send on your behalf. And many of those things send from subdomains, but you want them to send from your primary domain, right? So that's relaxed alignment. The from domain can be validity.com, and the sending domain can be mail.validity.com, exacttarget.validity.com, whatever it is. You're able to mix and match so long as the organizational domains, as long as they're all saying validity.com in that top part, you're good. And you can go send as you want. If you have strict alignment, all those services need to send from their subdomains only and can't use your organizational domain, which as a marketer is, why would you add that cruft to your mail? You don't have to. Relaxed alignment is pretty much good enough for everyone and gives you the protection of DMARC and lets you apply policy across all your messages, meet the requirements, not just where they're at today, but where they're going. And that's really significant. But again, alignment as a concept is really about mapping the from address to something that's authenticated and making sure that the primary domain in both are the same.
Awesome. I feel like I'm better equipped to answer that question next time it gets thrown at me. And I love the analogy of DMARC as the three-legged stool. With your permission, I am going to plagiarize that in
Please.
future. So we've touched on the different policies, and we're going to explore this in a little bit more detail with our next question. But audience, would like to bring you into the conversation again. And here the question, another reasonably simple one. What DMARC policy are you currently using for your email program? And I think, Seth, in addition to some great Q&As, there's a really interesting thread going on in the chat at the moment. And I think especially from some of our ESP and agency attendees, saying that, with their customers, it's been a tough journey and a lot of education required. And most of them are just saying, listen, I just want to get that bare minimum in place and be done with it. And so I think we'll talk to that in a little bit more in a moment. That's great. I think we got the results. Let's have a look at them. And wow, I think you couldn't get much closer to splitting that pie into 4 equal quarters. P equals none, P equals quarantine, P equals reject, all very, very similar percentages. And I think sorry, go ahead.
And congratulate your audience. That's a much higher percentage of quarantine and reject that we're used to seeing on these sorts of webinars. So that's phenomenal to see.
100%. Go Validity customers. And if you're part of that bucket of don't know, well, hopefully by the time we're finished today, we'll have given you all of the right questions to go and ask the right people in your company. Great. Thank you for that. There's one more to come. Seth, let's talk about that. I think especially for all of those senders out there who have implemented DMARC with P equals none, we've probably already explained that, this should just be the starting point. And what are our recommendations for moving them further down that path, getting them to P equals quarantine or P equals reject? And how quickly should they be aiming to achieve this?
So I'm going to answer this question out of both sides of my mouth, if you don't mind, Guy. That you should obviously, I believe you should be doing it now. We're seeing the North Korea attacks. We're seeing this increase in spam and phishing, right? You're not really protected until you actually have policy in place. Whether it's quarantine or reject is really about what your organization is willing to put in place. Reject is better because people still rescue things from the spam folder, as I'm sure your audience is very well aware of. But if you don't have a front door and you're arguing between steel or wood, any door is better than no door, right? And that's the key thing is don't obsess over what policy to move to. Move towards a policy. Have an understanding. The reality is as is being discussed in the chat is it's difficult. It's a lot of work. People want to meet the bare minimum and be done. And I think when we talk about the Google and Yahoo and soon to be Microsoft requirements, the end goal is enforcement. It is P equals reject or quarantine for your domain because that's where the protection ecosystem happens, right? We do not get the protection Google and Yahoo want or the ecosystem needs from P equals none at scale. We get it from policy at scale. And so what is happening now is people are going to have to go back again and again and again, make changes and make changes and make changes. And what we don't want to do is have death by 1,000 cuts of these customers. Well, this was the change today. And then Google moved the bar up and Google moved the bar up. They've been really clear where the goal is, where the bar is ultimately going to be. Even if it's 2 or 3 years from now, we know where it's going. Why make people do the work again and again and again? You're going to bleed them out. And if you can do it now, if you're leading in, if you're going, oh, here's what I'm using. This one's not aligned. This one's doesn't have DKIM that it needs. And you're going and doing that work, finish the job. Like yes, it's a little bit more work. Yes, it's a little scarier because when you turn on that policy, right, if you made a mistake, right, you could risk good mail with bad. Obviously, we provide tools because we give people confidence that they're not risking good mail with bad. But you can see that you have lots of options, but finish the journey, protect your customers, protect your own brand, and then you don't have to worry about the future state of requirements. You're already set because you knew where it was going and you've done the work. And that's actually easier in the long run and more effective, and your brand's protected.
Absolutely right. And I think, coming back to a comment you made when we were prepping for today's call, this is one of those things in life where there is an absolute cost to doing nothing, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Look, the fraud numbers are outrageous, and look, there's multiple ways business email compromise happens. This is the biggest, meatiest, easiest one to abuse. And as more people get DMARC in place, those left with P equals none, right? We already talked about how people with P equals none get attacked more. When there's fewer and fewer of those, and you're one of them, you're a bigger target.
Absolutely. Now, earlier on, we were sort of talking about the broad range of DMARC benefits, and let's talk about one which I know is a pet topic for you and me. So, senders who have implemented DMARC with P equals quarantine or reject can then introduce BIMI for their email programs. And for those of you who may not be familiar with this term yet, we are talking about brand indicators for message identification, which allows senders to show their approved logo right next to their emails in their subscribers' inboxes. And as you'll see, we're big fans of BIMI here at Validity, especially with those trusted sender check marks that you now get from Yahoo and Gmail, which is really, really great for establishing strong levels of trust with your subscribers. So, Seth, let's talk about this opportunity. It's not just about implementing DMARC, but DMARC sets you up to move forward and do better things with your email program.
Exactly. DMARC is that ground floor of trust we need to unlock the next level of email, right? As I said at the beginning, right? Email started with a trusted network of people on trusted computers, the trusted networks. So there was no trust built into email. That's what all the fraud and spoofing abuses. When you actually know this mail's from Validity, this mail's from Valimail, now we can do more. We can transact more. And so BIMI is an incentive, right? Where historically, if you sent messages wrong, you'd get a fish hook, or maybe you get sent to spam, right? Or risk the message being rejected. Now you're actually able to bring the visual indicator into the Chrome of the message, right? If you look at an inbox, right, forgetting the promotions tab in Gmail for a second, right, there's no way to elevate outside of the message. You have to actually get a user into the message to see your iconography, to see what you want to say. BIMI puts the logo in the inbox. BIMI is the only source of logos in Apple Mail on both the desktop and their clients. BIMI is in Gmail, BIMI is in Yahoo Mail, BIMI is in a host of international mailboxes. And what we've seen is when you have a BIMI logo, on average, a 10% increase in open and engagement rates. Not just open, but also engagement. Because people learn to distinguish the brand. And obviously with these check marks, and these check marks guy also exist in Apple Mail and the whole Apple ecosystem. It really gives people confidence in the message. And BIMI, right, it's built on authentication, it's built on DMARC. There are always little things to play with, but this is driving really, really interesting engagement from the community. And we're working to make this even more accessible to brands of all shapes and sizes, because we want everyone to get DMARC in place, right? If you're going to put the work in to meet these requirements, then BIMI becomes accessible to everyone. They want everyone using BIMI because it boosts that brand awareness in the venue that brands have never actually been able to get into before. And it does it at scale, and you can control the image. Historically here, logos had been sourced from Twitter, from Bing, from LinkedIn, from like these weird sources, and it was just awful. This gives your brand control, and it puts that somewhere special where users engage with it more productively.
So let me ask you a question, because I think you
Sure.
make a really good case for BIMI. You know, you're a wonderful BIMI sales guy there. And if I wasn't already convinced, I would be by now. But take up hasn't been that great yet. You know, what do you think is holding senders back? Why hasn't BIMI adoption been more than we've seen so far?
There are two reasons. First one is you need a special logo in a special type of SVG format that basically you can't put hidden images or code or text in it. And so you have to do a little bit of work. It's not a straight line from I output this thing from Adobe Illustrator and in it goes. And that's proved cumbersome, but there's a lot of automation in the ecosystem to make that easy. The real slowdown for BIMI adoption is today it requires a registered trademark. And people tend to not have registered trademarks that look good in that reticle in most mail clients. And so that adds time, complexity, and cost to BIMI implementation that we don't want there. And so as a working group, we are working on making this more applicable. And we're close, but not yet where we want to be. We're hoping for good things back half of this year that dovetail really nicely with the new Google Yahoo requirements. So as people do that work, BIMI then becomes accessible for them at scale. And so we're really excited, but we're not quite there yet.
Great to hear. Audience, here's your final question for today on this topic. Keen to hear what your plans are when it comes to adding BIMI to your email program. You already there? You currently doing it? Thinking of doing it? Where are you in terms of your BIMI journey? And I think just while we're waiting for those responses, Seth, I'll tell you a quick anecdote. I produced some research in the UK for the DMA over the years, and one of the questions we asked consumers, what's the biggest thing that makes you open a marketing email that you've received? And you kind of thought it would be like, yeah, killer subject line. But actually, the top answer was, I recognize and trust the sender. And you just think that plays right to BIMI's strengths.
It does. Cool. The fascinating thing on that one guy is the results coming from this survey is we've also found once a logo, like the logo increases engagement rates, but when you're used to seeing the logo and the logo disappears, people are suspicious.
Yes,
very quickly, which really helps on the security side. It's not direct benefit to the brand, but it's direct benefit if the brand's being phished.
Right, let's have a quick look at those results. And so the biggest answer, not necessarily there yet, but definitely planning on implementing. So hopefully your sales pitch has contributed a little bit to that response. Awesome. Thank you so much. We've got one more question, and Seth, I think between you and me, let's keep the answer to it relatively brief because there's a load of questions we want to get to as well. But just in terms of wrapping up, let's finish by looking ahead. I think we know that emails are a classic case of the only constant being change. It absolutely never stands still. So when it comes to today's topic, what should senders be thinking about to help future-proof their programs against whatever might be just over the horizon? Because I'm sure the Gmails and the Yahoos and the Microsofts aren't done with us yet, are they?
Not even close, I don't think. The end goal for Google and Yahoo is to protect their users, right? It's as painful as maybe it's not to deliver your mail. It's to make sure the mail the users want is in their inbox. And the best way to do that is to own your identity. Turn off bad crap being sent in your name. And then you get the deliverability you deserve. That requires DMARC ad enforcement. So have a plan to get there. Obviously, I'm going to say do it today. You have time until you're required to do it, but know that there's work to be done. And then know that this actually unlocks more. It unlocks BIMI. If you've done this, you've got all the requirements for AMP and schema ready to go. and Google and Yahoo and the other mailboxes are also talking about more for users on a more broadly authenticated platform. What features can they give for people who've done this work, right? Today, the requirements are all stick. They want more carrots. They want to give more benefit, but they can't even build features for that because the number of people with DMARC enforcement is so small compared to the number of people who send email. They want to build features for a broad user base. That's what these requirements are getting them to. And that means you can be early adopters of the next generation of technology in the inboxes if you get this stuff in place early. I think that's shockingly powerful and important.
100%. Cool. A really, really great conversation. And I think often a good indicator of the quality of the conversation is what's going on in the chat and the Q&A. So let's jump into some of those. And Megan, I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on the Q&A while we've been chatting, but if you have, are there maybe sort of one or two that sort of really stand out to you that you think we should start with?
I've seen several questions about like what do I do with my DMARC report? How do I access them? How do I read them? There's been a lot of questions about that.
So
Awesome.
I'll touch on that super quickly. Is the success rate of doing it yourself, right, has been about 13% and is dropping with the sheer number of people putting DMARC in for the first place, right? You've dramatically changed the denominator, so the percentage gets tiny. Don't read a DMARC report yourself. It is a giant XML document full of IP addresses. You can't ask your organization who's sending from 1.2.3.4. There are free tools, there are free products, there are solutions that should make this easy. Send your DMARC report to someone who will make it more actionable for you than getting raw XML data, right? That's the number one place where people trip themselves up. They're like, I'm smart, I'm savvy, I can do this myself. At least do it yourself with the backing of something that takes the pain out of processing that report for you.
We had a really interesting question from David, and I think this is probably going back to the start of our conversation where we were talking about the threat landscape. And he is saying, can we envisage a world where bad actors effectively deploy a load of bot-driven, in inverted commas, real addresses with a view to generating spam complaints at scale and basically sort of tanking your reputation and perhaps extracting a ransomware payment for your troubles? And he signs off with asking for a friend who wants to create the most nerdy version of Breaking Bad ever. What do you make of that, Seth?
So that's fascinating. And look, the point of programs like this, of these requirements of getting DMARC enforcement, is you want to make things harder and more illegal for the bad actors, right? What we have today is way too easy and way too legal. So if you're talking about going through all that trouble, right, it's not something that threat actors can do at scale, anyone can do from their basement. And that sounds like a really painful regime that might impact things, but you got to be a special kind of person to go do that and drive that into the market. It's not accessible to threat actors at scale, and brands are better off even in that world, right? Because it's so much harder that's what they have to do to accomplish their malicious goals.
Absolutely. Coming back to reporting for a second, a question which is, if your email, when an email is rejected that has a DMARC policy of quarantine or reject, is the only way to know that if your email was rejected through DMARC reports?
No.
I think we're probably confusing two slightly different things here, but anyhow, go ahead.
Yeah. So there's some like the best thing you can do is get DMARC reports. It will tell you everything that went on at delivery, not inbox placement, but like what happened with the authentication when the mail was received. When things are rejected, you will get status codes that you can see from the MTA that say this was rejected due to DMARC. You can see the rejections from Google. If things are going to spam, you will not get a message, you will not know, right? Because everyone protects their spam engine. So rejection, you'll have a better line into than if you have P equals quarantine, you may not know what's happening. I hope I answered the question.
I feel like you did. We are top of hour, and I know people need to drop off. We've listed some additional resources if you'd like to figure out some more about the security conversation. Seth, I've got one more question which I'm going to put to you. It's quite an interesting one. From an attendee who's saying, we've run into an issue with BIMI implementation related to some misalignment between our root domains DMARC and the desired subdomains DMARC. We're going nuts internally trying to chase down the correct answer and policy. Could you possibly speak to how BIMI is meant to work on a subdomain?
Sure. So BIMI is supposed to be inherited by subdomains. If the mail is authenticated from that subdomain, you should only need the BIMI record on your organizational domain. There's no need to play whack-a-mole and have it at every level. You want to put BIMI, if you have a default BIMI record on validity.com, it doesn't matter what service you send, so long as you send authenticated, it will work across subdomains. You may get into trouble if you bought a BIMI logo from a certificate authority and have a hard-coded subdomain in there. That's where you'll have pain. You're much better off getting a BIMI certificate for your org domain, putting it on your org domain, and letting everything inherit it. That's the cleanest possible way. It's the easiest way, and that should avoid some of the complications you're sharing. Obviously, I don't have details. More than happy to engage directly and help find an answer.
Awesome. Right, we're going to have to wrap it up. I'm conscious we didn't get around to everyone's questions, but this is always a great opportunity for us to run a follow-up blog. And Seth, if you're happy, we might sort of workshop a few answers to some of the unanswered questions and put out an article over the coming days.
Would love to. And thank you
Awesome.
for your time.
It's been so great having you with us today, and thank you for being so generous with your expertise and your insights. I think the audience took a load out of it, and as I say, not just the Q&As, but such a brilliant chat going on as well. So thank you, and thank you to you, the audience. Really appreciate you giving up an hour of your time, and hopefully it's been valuable. Hopefully it's been a good learning experience, and you've got a few ideas and tips and tricks to take back to your email programs. We will be back again in 4 weeks' time on July 17, and we will be speaking to Shutterfly and learning all about how they've been introducing hyper-personalization into their already high-performing email program. So it's going to be another great episode. Don't miss it. We will see you then.
Thank
Bye
you,
for
everyone.
now.